There are mornings when the atmosphere feels heavy before the sun even rises. You sense battles you cannot see, anxiety dawn. Light exposes what is hidden. It gives form to what was uncertain. When the Lord becomes your light, He defines your understanding of every situation. Circumstances lose their power to intimidate because they can no longer confuse you. There are moments when life presents you with conditions that contradict your prayers. The storm rises, the opposition intensifies, and suddenly you question whether God is still near. But divine presence does not operate by sight, it operates by promise. God never promised to keep you away from the valley. He promised to walk with you through it. The measure of His presence is not seen in the absence of battle, but in the calm that remains within the battlefield. When your heart carries the awareness of divine companionship, fear becomes irrational. You realize that no environment of your eyes. The awareness of divine presence also shapes your identity. When you know who is with you, you remember who you are. Many lose their sense of direction, not because life became harder, but because they forgot the companionship of God in the process. His presence restores perspective. It reminds you that you were not designed to live by reaction, but by revelation. You carry divine DNA, and divine presence activates that identity. When you speak, heaven recognizes your authority. When you move, heaven aligns your path. The atmosphere of divine presence makes you a carrier of peace, a transmitter of hope, a living reflection of God's reality on earth. That is why darkness trembles when you awaken in the consciousness of His presence, because light has entered the room through you. Divine presence also dismantles the illusion of control. We often fear what we cannot manage, forgetting that control was never meant to be our source of safety. Presence replaces control with trust. It shifts your focus from managing circumstances to maintaining communion. The goal is not to predict what will happen, but to remain aware of who is with you when it does. When you prioritize presence, God handles what you cannot handle. He becomes your strategist in confusion, your comforter in grief, your defender in opposition. His presence is not a distant aura. It is an active force guiding every moment of your existence. And the more you cultivate awareness of that presence, the less the external world can influence your internal state. Every great man or woman of faith carried this secret. They were ordinary people who lived with extraordinary awareness. Moses could face Pharaoh because he had encountered the burning presence of God. Daniel could rest among lions because he recognized that divine presence filled the den. David could face Goliath because he had already met God in the wilderness. The presence did not remove the challenge, it redefined it. That same presence is available every morning to those who seek it. It waits to overshadow your anxiety, to silence the noise, to clothe you in peace that defies understanding. The secret is not in praying for God to be near, but in awakening to the reality that He already is. To dwell in divine presence is to live in divine rhythm. You stop rushing, you stop competing, you stop comparing. You begin to move at the pace of purpose. Circumstances no longer dictate your speed or steal your serenity. You understand that every delay, every detour, every challenge is still under divine supervision. That is the confidence that comes from presence. The assurance that nothing can happen to you without first passing through the hands of God. When you live like this, your soul becomes still, your decisions become clear, and your spirit becomes fearless. You stop seeing obstacles as opposition and start seeing them as instruments. You no longer need to be seen, validated, or defended, because presence becomes your identity. So when the storms rise, do not look at the waves. Look at the presence that walks upon them. When fear whispers your name, respond with awareness, not anxiety. The Lord is your light and your salvation. That means He defines what you see and secures where you stand. His presence is your protection, your peace, your strength, your direction. When you carry that awareness, you do not merely survive the day, you govern it. You walk into every situation as one who already knows the outcome. That God is with you, and because He is, you cannot be shaken. There is a strength that cannot be measured by appearance, a confidence that does not come from talent, wealth, or influence. It is the quiet, immovable power of a heart detached from fear and anchored in faith. True protection begins the moment you stop clinging to things that were never designed to secure you. Fear is not just an emotion, it is an attachment. It is the mind holding on to the illusion of control, the heart depending on what can change. But when your spirit becomes detached from external validation and anchored in divine truth, you walk in a confidence that cannot be shaken. Detachment is not apathy, it is alignment. It means you have decided that peace is not a product of circumstances, but a fruit of revelation. There is a kind of freedom that comes when you no longer need everything to go right to feel right. The world teaches you to secure peace by managing outcomes, but the Spirit teaches you to secure peace by trusting presence. You cannot experience divine protection if your emotions are constantly negotiating with uncertainty. The moment you attach your sense of safety to the stability of your environment, you become vulnerable to everything that shifts. But when your confidence is rooted in God's unchanging character, you begin to live beyond the reach of chaos. You realize that the storms of life are not meant to drown you, but to reveal how deeply anchored you are. A detached heart does not mean a disconnected heart. It means a heart so connected to God that no external force can alter its peace. Spiritual detachment is the mark of maturity. It is the point where you stop living from reaction and start living from revelation. The immature believer is moved by what happens. The mature believer is moved by what God has spoken. Detachment trains you to differentiate between what is important and what is eternal. You learn to release your grip on what fades and strengthen your hold on what remains. Every morning when you rise, the world demands your attention. News, deadlines, relationships, expectations. But the wise soul first detaches to reattach. Before speaking to people, it speaks to God. Before engaging with noise, it settles in stillness. That is where confidence is born. In silence before strength. Confidence is not arrogance, it is awareness. It is the knowing that even when nothing seems under control, everything remains under authority. Detachment allows you to see from a higher place. When your emotions are tied to outcomes, your peace rises and falls like a tide. But when your emotions are tied to eternity, your peace becomes constant. You stop asking, what will happen to me? Start declaring, God is with me, therefore I will stand. Every battle you face loses its power to define you when your trust is no longer in the battle, but in the builder of your soul. Detachment repositions you to respond, not react. It teaches your spirit to pause in the presence of God before moving in the pressure of life. Detachment does not make you careless, it makes you fearless. It does not strip you of passion, it refines it. The detached person still feels deeply, but they are no longer governed by what they feel. They can love without fear of loss, give without fear of lack, and serve without fear of being unseen. Their confidence is no longer derived from performance or approval, but from purpose. That is why people who have learned detachment walk differently. Their peace is not fragile. Their joy is not borrowed. Their strength is not seasonal. They have discovered a secret. Emotional stability is a reflection of spiritual security. When your heart is hidden in God, nothing external can uproot your calm. Psalm 27 declares, "The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid?" The strength of life is not in your plans, it is in your position. The Lord does not become your strength until you release your dependence on everything else. Detachment is an act of surrender. It is the decision to let go of outcomes and trust divine timing. It is the willingness to say, even if it doesn't happen my way, I believe it will happen His way. That mindset builds unshakable faith. You begin to walk through valleys without panic and face giants without retreat. You stop negotiating your peace with situations that have no authority over your destiny. A detached spirit sees through divine perspective. It looks at rejection and sees redirection. It looks at delay and sees preparation. It looks at pain and sees transformation. Because detachment doesn't mean indifference. It means interpretation. You no longer interpret life through wounds, but through wisdom. The peace of a detached person confuses those who live by sight, because they cannot comprehend how you can smile in uncertainty, how you can worship while waiting, how you can be still while everything around you shakes. It's because detachment has taught you to separate your emotional climate from your external weather. The world may storm, but your soul remains clear. Emotional detachment from fear also releases divine clarity. Many cannot hear God because their hearts are too noisy. Anxiety amplifies the wrong voices. Detachment silences them. When you stop needing everything to make sense, you create space for revelation. When you stop chasing outcomes, you start perceiving direction. God's voice becomes clearer when your soul stops competing for control. The spiritually detached person walks in divine rhythm because they are no longer wrestling with every uncertainty. They have learned that protection is not found in prediction, but in presence. They wake up each morning not to take charge of the world, but to align with the will of heaven. There is power in waking up unbothered by what has not yet unfolded. That calm confidence comes from knowing that the one who watches over you never sleeps. The detached person doesn't ignore responsibility. They simply refuse to carry the burden of what belongs to God. When you detach from the illusion of control, you allow the Creator to become your caretaker. You learn to live from peace, not pressure. You learn that trust is not passive, it is powerful. It shifts the atmosphere of your heart and aligns you with divine flow. The one who trusts is never desperate, because desperation is the language of those who doubt God's timing. Detachment also cultivates endurance. When your emotions are no longer tethered to immediate gratification, you gain the strength to wait without wavering. Waiting becomes worship, and patience becomes power. Every delay is no longer punishment, but preparation. Detachment gives you the wisdom to endure without complaining and to grow without comparing. You realize that confidence is not a feeling. It is a decision to believe even when nothing looks believable. You stop measuring God's faithfulness by comfort and start measuring it by consistency. You detach from needing proof and you attach to promise. When your heart is detached from fear and anchored in faith, divine protection surrounds you naturally. Peace becomes your atmosphere. Confidence becomes your language. You start to attract divine favor because heaven recognizes stability. God can trust a detached heart with greater responsibility because it is not easily swayed by reward or rejection. The detached believer does not need to be seen to be secure or applauded to be assured. Their stability is supernatural. They have found the secret, not as victims of circumstance, but as vessels of divine order. And wherever they go, the world feels the weight of that calm, unshakable confidence that only heaven can produce. There is something sacred about the morning. Before the world awakens, before the noise begins, before decisions and distractions fill the mind, the soul stands between night and day, between stillness and motion. The morning is not just another part of the day. It is a divine appointment, a sacred moment when heaven leans close to see who will seek its wisdom. How you begin determines how heaven aligns your steps. The secret of strength, clarity, and divine protection lies in what you do before the world demands your attention. Every sunrise carries a message. Come into alignment before you enter activity. It is in that early stillness that the heart is shaped, the mind is fortified, and the spirit is positioned under divine covering. Psalm 27 speaks of dwelling in the house of the Lord and seeking Him early. That word seek carries the idea of priority, not convenience. To seek God in the morning is to say, before I face anything, I must face you. The morning is when the soul is most moldable. When your spirit listens before the world begins to speak. The one who learns to begin their day with God's presence will never end it in confusion. Fellowship in the morning sets the direction of your focus. When you meet with God first, every challenge that follows must submit to the authority you've already established in His presence. The reason many walk in fear is not that their enemies are strong, but that their mornings are empty. You cannot conquer a day you have not consecrated. The morning is not simply a time to pray, it is a time to align. It is where vision is refreshed and protection is renewed. When you awaken with gratitude and acknowledgement of God's presence, heaven releases clarity. You stop waking up reacting to the world and start commanding your world through declaration. The spiritual law is simple. Whatever you magnify first in your day will govern the rest of it. If you magnify problems, you will live in reaction. If you magnify God, you will walk in direction. Morning fellowship becomes a strategy, not a ritual. It recalibrates your emotions, reminds your mind of your identity, and reintroduces your soul to peace. In those early moments, divine protection is activated not through words alone, but through awareness. You don't beg for safety, you awaken into it. God's protection is already present. Morning fellowship simply positions you to recognize it. When you start your day in God's presence, you establish spiritual boundaries before the enemy can draw his. You begin the day with divine light, and light exposes every hidden scheme. That's why the morning is powerful. It shifts the unseen before it manifests in the seen. It is where battles are won before they appear. There is also a mystery in the timing of morning fellowship. God moves with rhythm, not randomness. He created the world in order, establishing the morning as a symbol of new beginnings. Each sunrise represents mercy renewed, grace extended, and opportunity restored. Those who understand this rhythm never treat the morning casually. They approach it as priests entering the temple, aware that what they offer in those moments determines what flows from heaven that day. When you wake up with worship, gratitude, and scripture, you are not performing religion. You are legislating in the Spirit. You are declaring to every force of darkness that your day belongs to God. Your mind belongs to peace, and your purpose belongs to heaven. The morning is also the training ground of spiritual sensitivity. The reason many cannot discern God's voice during the day is because they never trained their ears to hear Him in the quiet. Morning fellowship sharpens discernment. It teaches you to recognize the tone of heaven so that when distractions come, your spirit remains anchored. It's in the morning that the Spirit often whispers strategy, correction, and comfort. The world calls it intuition. Heaven calls it communion. That divine nudge that keeps you from making a wrong decision, that quiet assurance that tells you to wait or move. Those are fruits of morning fellowship. To start your morning in God's protection is to understand that prayer is not a routine, it's a positioning. When you pray early, you are not informing God of your needs. You are informing your soul of His sovereignty. You remind yourself that you are not walking into an uncertain world alone. The detached heart finds its stability in those moments. For fellowship with God dissolves fear. The more you commune with Him, the less the world's noise affects you. You stop seeking validation because you have already been affirmed in His presence. Morning fellowship creates spiritual immunity. It shields you from the infection of worry, the poison of doubt, and the virus of comparison. There is also something deeply intimate about morning moments with God. It is the time when the soul uncloses itself before its Creator. No pretense, no performance, no titles, just raw humanity meeting divine holiness. It is in that vulnerability that transformation begins. You begin to see yourself not as the world sees you, but as heaven intended. That revelation becomes your armor throughout the day. The person who meets with God in the morning carries a fragrance the world cannot ignore. A quiet authority, a radiant peace, a discernment that others can feel but cannot explain. Morning fellowship is also where renewal happens. Every day brings residue. Yesterday's worries, last night's thoughts, unspoken fears. And without renewal, the soul begins to decay under the weight of accumulation. But when you come before God early, you empty what is old to receive what is new. His word cleanses, His Spirit restores, and His peace resets your emotional rhythm. That is divine protection. renewed awareness that nothing has permission to dwell in you that heaven has not assigned. It's not only about being shielded from harm, it's about being strengthened for purpose. You do not simply ask for safety, you become the embodiment of stability. Starting your morning in God's presence also brings a sense of divine timing. When you commune early, your decisions begin to align with heaven's schedule. Delays stop frustrating you because you understand synchronization. You realize that when God is your first conversation, He becomes your silent guidance throughout the day. Even in ordinary tasks, your spirit remains aware of divine orchestration. That is why those who begin their mornings with God often see divine coincidences. Doors open, favor follows, peace flows. It's not coincidence, it's coordination. The universe bends toward the one who begins the day in harmony with its creator. There is something profoundly protective about praise in the morning. Praise shifts the atmosphere faster than worry ever could. When you declare God's goodness before your circumstances reveal it, you are exercising faith that confuses darkness. Demons understand authority, and praise is a sound of authority. Every time you begin your morning magnifying God, you weaken the power of fear. You declare to the spiritual realm that this day will be governed by gratitude, not anxiety, by revelation, not reaction. The one who learns to sing before sunrise carries victory before battle. And finally, the power of morning fellowship lies in its consistency. It's not about length, it's about loyalty. The consistent act of meeting God early builds spiritual muscle. It teaches discipline, humility, and dependence. Over time, it rewires your mind, reshapes your emotions, and rebuilds your confidence. You stop asking God to join your plans because your mornings have already aligned you with His. Every day becomes an extension of that sacred meeting. The morning becomes a covenant hour, a time when heaven recognizes your voice and earth responds to your authority. You begin to move through life not reacting to what happens, but releasing what was established in that stillness. Morning fellowship is the womb of divine protection, the cradle of revelation, and the foundation of unshakable peace. When you learn to start your morning in God's presence, you stop walking through days unguarded. You walk through them governed